I never expected my peaceful Thursday afternoon would be interrupted by the most absurd demand I'd ever heard. The doorbell rang just as I was checking on my honeybees in the backyard, my pride and joy alongside my vegetable garden. Have you ever had a neighbor show up at your door with HOA documents demanding your property for their personal use? Drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from. I'm still shocked when I think about how this all started. When I opened the door, there stood Karen, our neighborhood's self-promoted HOA enforcer, clutching a folder of papers with our Homeowners Association logo emblazoned on the front. Her perfectly highlighted bob haircut and designer sunglasses perched on her head screamed, "I want to speak to your manager," before she even opened her mouth. "I need your backyard for my summer BBQ series," she announced without so much as a hello. Not asked, needed, as if my property was somehow a communal resource she could commandeer at will. I stood there, coffee mug still in hand, genuinely wondering if this was some bizarre prank for a moment, but Karen's stern expression confirmed she was dead serious. "Excuse me," I managed to reply, still processing the audacity. That's when she flipped open her folder and pointed to some vaguely worded clause about community space utilization and shared resources. According to HOA regulations, certain areas can be designated for community events with proper approval. I've been planning a luxury BBQ series for our more influential neighbors, and your backyard has the perfect layout. She glanced past me toward my backyard where my beehives sat peacefully near my blooming vegetable garden. Of course, those bee things will have to go. They're a safety hazard and not approved anyway. The casual way she dismissed my beehives, which I had maintained for 3 years with all proper permits, made my blood boil. These weren't just a hobby. They were vital pollinators for my garden and the surrounding area, and the honey they produced was the best I'd ever tasted. I work from home as a graphic designer, which means I have a flexible schedule, but also that my home is my sanctuary. The thought of Karen and her country club friends invading my space, drinking champagne, and destroying the ecosystem I'd carefully cultivated was absolutely not happening. "This is private property, Karen. I have the deed and property lines clearly marked. The HOA doesn't have authority to claim my backyard for parties." I tried to keep my voice level despite the ridiculous situation. Karen's expression shifted from confident to slightly annoyed, but she wasn't backing down. "Well, there's an HOA meeting next week. We'll just see what the board has to say about those dangerous bees of yours. There are children in this neighborhood, you know." As she turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of that smug smile, the one that said she believed her position on the HOA board made her untouchable. "This isn't over," she called over her shoulder as she strutted back to her oversized SUV parked in my driveway. "I've already sent out invitations. The garden party is happening with or without your cooperation." The moment she was out of sight, I grabbed my phone and called Lucy, my college friend who now worked as a paralegal. If there was anyone who could help me navigate this HOA nightmare, it would be her. As I dialed, I watched my beehives from the kitchen window, suddenly worried about what lengths Karen might go to if she didn't get her way. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a neighborhood war that would eventually end in sweet, sweet justice. The next day, I met Lucy at our favorite coffee shop downtown, my folder of property documents and HOA bylaws tucked under my arm. The small cafe was bustling with the lunch crowd, but we managed to snag a corner table where we could speak privately. Lucy arrived in her typical fashion, slightly rushed, her curly hair pulled back, and a determined look in her eyes that reminded me why she was on track to becoming a formidable lawyer someday. "So this HOA Karen thinks she can just annex your backyard for a party?" she asked, already flipping through the papers I'd brought. I nodded, recounting the bizarre encounter while Lucy's expression grew increasingly indignant. "That's not how HOAs work at all. They can regulate appearance and enforce certain standards, but they can't just commandeer private property for someone's personal use. This is exactly the kind of power-tripping nonsense that gives HOAs a bad name," she mumbled, marking sections of the bylaws with sticky notes. I could see the wheels turning in her head. This was exactly the kind of challenge she lived for. From what you're telling me, she's banking on intimidation and vague wording in the community guidelines. HOAs thrive on residents not knowing their actual rights, Lucy explained, pushing her glasses up her nose. But here's the thing, your property deed trumps HOA wishful thinking every time. And your bees? As long as you have the proper permits and they're not creating a nuisance, she doesn't have a legal leg to stand on. Lucy had always been passionate about fighting injustice, ever since we met in Political Science 101. She worked as a paralegal at a small firm specializing in property disputes, and though she wasn't a full-fledged attorney yet, her knowledge of local regulations was impressive. "I'm going to help you fight this," she said firmly, "not just for you, but because people like Karen need to learn they can't bully their way through life using rule books they barely understand." As we were wrapping up our strategy session, my phone buzzed with a text from Adam, my next-door neighbor. He'd overheard Karen talking about her plans at the mailbox and wanted to check if everything was okay. Adam worked for an environmental nonprofit focused on conservation and had been an enthusiastic supporter of my beekeeping from day one. I suggested he stop by later that afternoon to discuss the situation. By the time I arrived home, Adam was already waiting on my porch, a concerned expression on his kind face. "I heard Karen's on the warpath about your bees," he said as I unlocked the door. "She's been telling everyone they're aggressive and dangerous, which is complete nonsense." Adam followed me to the backyard where we stood watching the honeybees peacefully going about their business. Unlike me with my occasional stings, Adam had a natural way with the bees, almost like he could communicate with them. "These are some of the gentlest creatures," he said, carefully approaching one of the hives. "They only sting when threatened. Karen's crusade isn't just misguided, it's ecologically irresponsible. Your bees pollinate gardens all over the neighborhood. They're a community asset, not a liability." Adam's normally soft-spoken demeanor took on an edge of determination. "I can document the hive behavior and provide testimony about their temperament if needed. I've got research data showing the positive impact of urban beekeeping on local ecology. Karen's not the only one who can come armed with paperwork." Our impromptu strategy meeting gained another member when Brian, my gaming buddy who'd recently moved into the neighborhood, showed up with a 6-pack of craft beer and a state-of-the-art security camera. "Thought you might need some reinforcements," he grinned, setting the beer on my kitchen counter. Brian worked in IT and had a passion for gadgets that occasionally bordered on obsession. "Karen gave me grief last month about my car being parked improperly in my own driveway. That woman's on a power trip." He pulled the small camera from his messenger bag. "This little beauty is motion-activated, weatherproof, and sends alerts directly to your phone. If anyone tries to mess with your bees while you're not around, you'll have video evidence." Brian had only lived in our neighborhood for a few months, but had already experienced Karen's particular brand of HOA enforcement. His enthusiasm for catching her in the act was partly neighborly concern and partly his love for drama. As the four of us sat around my dining table that evening, nursing beers and plotting strategy, I felt a surge of gratitude. 24 hours ago, I'd been blindsided by Karen's outrageous demand. Now I had a legal advisor, an environmental expert, and a tech specialist in my corner. "The HOA meeting is next Tuesday," I said, looking around at my friends. "Karen's going to try to make this official. We need to be ready." Lucy nodded, reviewing her notes. "We'll present the property boundaries, permits, and environmental benefits. If she pushes, we push back with facts and documentation." Adam raised his bottle in agreement. "To the bees," he toasted with a smile. Brian was already busy mounting the security camera with a clear view of the backyard. As everyone was leaving, Lucy pulled me aside at the door. "Be careful," she warned quietly. "Karen didn't get where she is by playing fair. She might have more tricks up her sleeve than we realize." Tuesday evening arrived faster than I expected, bringing with it a knot of anxiety in my stomach as I approached the community center where our HOA meetings were held. The room was already half full when I arrived, residents chatting in hushed voices while setting up folding chairs in neat rows. Karen was at the front, speaking animatedly with 2 other board members. occasionally gesturing in my direction with barely concealed disdain. I spotted Lucy already seated near the front, her legal pad ready and a determined gleam in her eye. Adam slipped in quietly beside me, giving my shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "Ready for battle?" he whispered with a smile that didn't quite mask his concern. Brian arrived last, sliding into the seat on my other side and discreetly showing me the voice recorder app running on his phone. "Just in case," he murmured. The meeting began with the usual procedural items: budget updates, complaints about improper trash can placement, and debates over the community pool hours. I barely heard any of it, mentally rehearsing the points Lucy and I had prepared. Finally, the board president, a retired accountant named Dave, announced, "Next item, Karen Thompson's proposal for a community garden party series." Karen stood, straightening her designer blazer as she took center stage. Her presentation was polished and persuasive, complete with digital mock-ups of a sophisticated garden party that would enhance community prestige and provide networking opportunities with influential figures from the city. She carefully avoided mentioning that the location for this grand vision was my backyard, instead referring to it as the eastern green space adjacent to Maple Drive. This series of events would put our neighborhood on the map, Karen concluded, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "We've already received RSVPs from 2 city council members and a prominent real estate developer." She paused for effect, scanning the room. "There is, however, one small issue to address. The proposed location currently houses unauthorized beehives that pose a significant safety risk to attendees." And there it was, the real agenda dressed up as community concern. Murmurs rippled through the audience. I felt my face flush with anger at the blatant mischaracterization, but Lucy's hand on my arm kept me from interrupting. "Let her finish," Lucy whispered. "She's digging her own hole." When Karen finally sat down, Lucy stood before I could, smoothly taking the floor with professional confidence. "Good evening, everyone. I'm Lucy Martinez, speaking on behalf of my client and your neighbor." The word client silenced the murmurs. This was no longer just a neighborhood squabble. While Ms. Thompson's proposal sounds lovely in theory, there are several critical issues that must be addressed. Lucy methodically outlined the legal boundaries of my property, confirmed by the county records she'd brought copies of. She displayed my beekeeping permits and certification, approved by the city. As for the claim that these are unauthorized hives posing significant risk, that is demonstrably false. She nodded to Adam, who stood and briefly explained the gentle nature of honeybees and their environmental benefits. Karen's face grew increasingly pinched as Lucy dismantled her proposal point by point. When Lucy finished, Karen shot to her feet. "This isn't about property lines," she snapped, abandoning her earlier diplomacy. "It's about safety and community standards. Those bees are dangerous. My friend's cousin's child was nearly killed by a bee sting last summer." The vague, second-hand anecdote hung in the air awkwardly. Furthermore, apiaries violate Section 8 of our community guidelines, which prohibits activities that may cause harm or disturbance to residents. Dave, the board president, looked uncomfortable as he flipped through the HOA handbook. "Actually, Karen, beekeeping isn't specifically mentioned in our guidelines, and if the property is indeed outside HOA jurisdiction as these documents suggest," he trailed off, clearly reluctant to contradict his fellow board member. The debate continued for another 30 minutes, with neighbors chiming in on both sides. Some supported Karen, citing vague concerns about property values and safety. Others defended my right to use my property as I saw fit, especially given the environmental benefits. Through it all, Karen grew increasingly flustered, her arguments becoming more emotional and less factual. Finally, Dave called for order. "The board needs time to review the documentation presented tonight. We'll issue a ruling on this matter within 2 weeks. Until then, no action is to be taken regarding either the proposed events or the beehives in question." It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a stay of execution. As the meeting adjourned, Karen brushed past me, her voice low but venomous. "This isn't over. Those bees are a liability waiting to happen. Better keep a close eye on them." Lucy, Adam, and Brian surrounded me as we walked to the parking lot, a protective formation that wasn't lost on the other residents watching us leave. "Round one to us," Lucy said with cautious optimism. "But Dave is weak-willed and Karen knows how to apply pressure. We need to stay vigilant." I nodded, glancing back at the community center where Karen remained, huddled with her supporters, her animated gestures suggesting she was already planning her next move. Adam followed my gaze and frowned. "I don't like the way she looked at you. Like she had something up her sleeve." Brian patted his pocket where his phone sat with the recording. "Let her try something, we'll be ready." But despite their reassurances, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wasn't going to let bylaws, property rights, or basic decency stand in the way of her luxury garden party plans. The morning after the HOA meeting, I woke up early to work on a design project that was due by the end of the week. Coffee in hand, I stepped onto my porch to enjoy the crisp morning air. And froze. There, staked prominently at the edge of my front yard where it met the sidewalk, was a large yellow sign with bold black letters. "Danger! Aggressive bees! Remove immediately!" The sign looked almost official, with what appeared to be an HOA logo in the corner, though I knew no such warning had been authorized at the meeting. My first instinct was to rip it out of the ground, but Lucy's voice echoed in my head about documenting everything. Instead, I took several photos from different angles, making sure to capture how the sign was placed, just inside my property line, a clear trespass. By noon, my phone was buzzing constantly with notifications. Karen had been busy beyond just planting signs. She'd posted in our neighborhood Facebook group, "Safety alert, dangerous bee colony in our community. A resident was stung yesterday and had to seek medical attention. Those with bee allergies should avoid Maple Drive until this threat is removed." The post had dozens of comments, many from concerned parents asking if their children were at risk. I felt sick reading through them, especially since every word was a fabrication. No one had been stung, no one had sought medical attention, yet Karen's fear-mongering was working. Residents who had been neutral at the meeting were now voicing concerns about their children's safety. Adam was quick to respond, posting a calm, scientifically accurate explanation about honeybees and their importance to our ecosystem. "Honeybees are non-aggressive when undisturbed," he wrote, including links to reputable research. "They are essential pollinators for our gardens and local agriculture. The hives in question are professionally maintained, fully permitted, and pose no threat to the community as long as they're respected, just like any wildlife." His post received some supportive comments, but they were quickly drowned out by fearful reactions, many from people who I suspected had been primed by Karen beforehand. One comment particularly caught my eye. "Why should our children be at risk just so someone can have a hobby? OAOA needs to act now." It came from a profile I didn't recognize, with no history of other posts in our community group. Brian came through with technical support, sharing a short video clip he'd captured of my beehives from the previous day. The footage showed the bees peacefully going about their business, flying between the hives and the flowering plants in my garden. "These don't look like killer bees to me," he captioned it, "just hard-working pollinators doing their job." The video helped sway some opinions, but Karen and her supporters simply claimed it was edited or taken during a rare calm period. The online debate continued to escalate, with neighbors taking sides. What had started as an absurd attempt to use my property had morphed into a character assassination, painting me as a reckless bee enthusiast, endangering the neighborhood. Lucy arrived that evening with takeout food and a folder full of printed city ordinances. "I've been researching all day," she said, spreading papers across my dining table. "The city code only restricts beekeeping if it creates a documented public nuisance, defined as aggressive behavior, excessive swarms, or hives placed too close to public walkways." She pulled out a highlighted document. "Your hives are properly positioned, professionally maintained, and have no history of complaints until Karen decided she wanted your yard for her party." Lucy's legal precision was reassuring, but we both knew this had moved beyond a simple matter of regulations. "She's trying to build public opinion against you," Lucy said bluntly. If enough neighbors complain, even baseless accusations can create pressure on the HOA board. We discussed options for countering Karen's propaganda campaign. Adam suggested hosting an educational session about beekeeping, inviting neighbors to learn about the process and the benefits of local honey. Brian wanted to set up a live stream of the beehives to show their peaceful nature in real time. Lucy focused on the legal angles, drafting a cease and desist letter regarding the false claims of medical incidents. As they debated strategies, I found myself growing increasingly concerned about the safety of my bees. What if she doesn't stop at signs and social media posts? I asked, interrupting their planning. What if she decides to take matters into her own hands? The question hung in the air, uncomfortable but necessary. Brian nodded slowly. That's why I brought this. He pulled out a second, smaller camera from his bag. Night vision, motion detection, alert system, the works. If anyone approaches your hives after dark, we'll know. As Lucy and Adam left that night, I helped Brian position the camera discreetly in a tree overlooking the beehives. Neither of us said it aloud, but we were both thinking the same thing. It wasn't a question of if Karen would escalate further, but when. My phone jolted me awake at 2:17 a.m. with an urgent alert from Brian's security app. The live feed showed a shadowy figure moving cautiously near my beehives. I called Brian, who promised to arrive in minutes, but I couldn't wait with my bees at risk. Grabbing a flashlight, I hurried outside where I heard the disturbing sound of someone tampering with my hives. I stepped into the open and aimed my powerful flashlight directly at the intruder. "Stop right there!" The figure spun around, momentarily frozen in the harsh light. It was John, Karen's husband, holding a wooden stick. One of my hive boxes had been partially dislodged. "What are you doing to my bees?" I demanded. John blinked rapidly, his expression shifting from shock to poor indignation. "This is HOA property," he stammered unconvincingly. "I'm just inspecting for safety violations." "You're trespassing on private property and damaging my beehives," I said firmly. "The police are already on their way." John dropped the stick and began backing away. "Karen said this was completely legal. She said the HOA has jurisdiction over hazardous situations." Just then, Brian's car pulled up and Adam appeared from his property, having heard the commotion. John looked increasingly panicked, caught between three angry neighbors and the disturbed beehive. What happened next unfolded in slow motion. As John retreated, his foot caught on the stick. He stumbled and crashed directly into the partially opened hive, toppling it with a loud crack. Bees poured out, their peaceful slumber violently interrupted. John screamed and began swatting wildly, which only agitated the bees further. "Don't move!" Adam shouted. "Cover your face and stay still." But panic had taken over. John continued flailing as he ran blindly across the yard, trailing a cloud of defensive bees. We managed to get John inside, where Adam administered first aid for multiple stings. Between pained gasps, John threatened legal action. "You set me up," he moaned. "Karen's going to sue you for everything you've got." Brian, who had been recording everything since arriving, stepped forward. "Let's be clear about what happened. You trespassed at 2 a.m. and deliberately damaged a beehive. We have the entire incident on video, including your admission that Karen sent you." Jean's puffy face flushed with the realization he'd been caught red-handed. As police lights appeared outside, Brian patted his phone reassuringly. Whatever happened next, we had the truth recorded. At the police station, John sat hunched miserably across the room, his swollen face telling its own story. Brian uploaded our security footage while Adam spoke with animal control. Lucy arrived, looking disheveled but speaking with professional authority. "No statements until I review the situation," she instructed, guiding me to a quiet corner. Karen burst through the doors 20 minutes later, her face a mask of righteous indignation. After fussing over John, she turned on me. "You'll be hearing from our attorney. You deliberately set your bees on my husband during a legitimate HOA inspection." Lucy stepped forward. "Mrs. Thompson, I advise you not to make false allegations that contradict video evidence. Your husband was trespassing at 2:17 a.m. and vandalized a legally maintained beehive. If anyone will be filing charges, it's my client." "What video?" "It was too dark to see anything clearly," Karen scoffed. Brian turned his tablet toward her, showing a crystal-clear night vision image of John prying open the hive. "We have everything recorded, including your husband stating you sent him." Karen's face transformed from shock to calculated composure. That could be anyone, and even if it was John, he was responding to community complaints about aggressive bees. Sergeant Rodriguez finally intervened. "We have a report of trespassing and property damage, countered by claims of dangerous animals. Animal control has found no violations regarding the hives. They're properly maintained and registered. As for the trespassing allegations, the video evidence appears to support those claims." "This is absurd. Those bees attacked my husband unprovoked," Karen protested. Adam, usually soft-spoken, stepped forward with authority. "Honeybees do not attack unprovoked. The video clearly shows Mr. Thompson physically damaging the hive, which is exactly the kind of disturbance that triggers a defensive response. The bees were defending their home after a direct attack." Sergeant Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. "Mr. Thompson, you have the right to file a complaint, but I should inform you that filing a false report is a misdemeanor, and the video evidence is quite clear." After statements were taken and forms filled out, Karen and John departed first. Karen turned back with one last threat. "This isn't over. The HOA board meeting is next week, and we'll see who they believe, a respected board member or some bee-crazy hippie with doctored videos." Lucy smiled confidently. "We look forward to presenting all of our evidence to the board." As we left, Brian reported that Karen was already posting on the neighborhood page, claiming John was viciously attacked while investigating safety concerns, with no mention of trespassing or the time of night. Lucy squeezed my shoulder reassuringly. "Don't worry, truth has a way of coming out, especially when it's caught on high-definition video. This time we've got her on the ropes." Despite everything that had happened, the police report, the video evidence, the pending HOA decision, Karen proceeded with her luxury BBQ plans with breathtaking audacity. 5 days after the late-night incident, glossy invitations appeared in select mailboxes throughout the neighborhood, announcing an afternoon of elegant garden dining to be held that Saturday. Brian, who had received an invitation due to Karen being unaware of our alliance, reported that the invitation listed my address as the venue, simply identifying it as the East Garden Terrace. The sheer nerve was almost admirable. Karen was either completely delusional or playing some elaborate game of chicken, betting that I wouldn't dare to interfere with her social event once her influential guests had arrived. Lucy advised me to send a formal cease and desist letter, which Karen promptly ignored. Adam suggested calling the police to prevent trespassing, but I was wary of escalating to that level with potentially prominent community members involved. "Let's see how this plays out," I told my concerned friends. Karen's built this entire scenario on lies about the property, about the bees, about what happened with John. At some point, reality has to catch up with her. Brian raised an eyebrow skeptically. "You're going to let her host a party in your yard?" I shook my head. "Absolutely not. But I'm curious just how far she'll take this charade before it collapses." In truth, I was banking on Karen's pride being her downfall. She had invested too much in this narrative to back down, and that inflexibility would ultimately be her undoing. Saturday arrived with perfect weather, warm sunshine, gentle breeze, exactly the kind of day that would tempt people outdoors. From my kitchen window, I watched with astonishment as rental company trucks began arriving at the entrance to the community park that bordered the back of my property. Workers unloaded tables, chairs, a portable bar, and even a small stage for what appeared to be live music. Karen supervised the setup with imperious gestures, directing the placement of each item with precision. The audacity was breathtaking. She was setting up her event in the community park, but positioning everything to expand into my yard, clearly planning to use my garden as the backdrop for her soiree. I immediately texted Lucy, Adam, and Brian. "It's happening. She's actually doing it." By 1 p.m., guests began to arrive, men in summer blazers and women in flowery dresses, exactly the upscale crowd Karen had promised the HOA. From my vantage point, I could see her greeting each arrival with air kisses and practiced charm, occasionally gesturing toward my yard with proprietary pride. The catering staff bustled about with trays of hors d'oeuvres and champagne flutes, while a string quartet set up near the property line. Karen had positioned her elaborate grill setup precisely at the border between the park and my yard, creating an ambiguous boundary that allowed her guests to naturally flow into my property. As the crowd grew, so did their footprint, with elegantly dressed attendees gradually migrating onto my lawn, glasses in hand, admiring my flower beds as if they were part of the venue's planned landscaping. I had remained inside, documenting everything with photos and videos as Lucy had advised, but when I saw Karen herself step fully into my yard to adjust a table placement, it was time to act. I walked outside, calmly, phone recording in my pocket as Brian had taught me. "Good afternoon," I called out pleasantly, causing nearby conversations to falter. "I'm afraid there seems to be some confusion. This is private property, not part of the community park or event space." Karen's head snapped up, her smile freezing in place as she saw me approaching. For just a moment, uncertainty flickered across her face before she recovered, turning to her guests with a dismissive laugh. "Oh, this is the neighbor I mentioned, the one with the bee hobby. Don't worry, we have permission to use this space from the HOA." The blatant lie hung in the air as guests looked between us, sensing the tension but uncertain of the dynamics. "Actually," I continued evenly, "the HOA has no authority to grant access to my private property, as was established in the police report filed earlier this week when your husband trespassed here." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, and I noticed a city council member I recognized from local news looking particularly uncomfortable. Karen's smile tightened, her eyes darting around as she assessed the situation. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she said with forced lightness. "We're just enjoying the beautiful day. Surely you don't mind your neighbors appreciating your lovely garden." Her tone conveyed the clear expectation that I wouldn't dare cause a scene in front of such distinguished guests. Before I could respond, the smell of smoke caught my attention. Karen's husband, John, still sporting faint remnants of bee stings on his face, was struggling with the large grill he'd positioned right at the property line. Thick smoke was billowing directly toward my beehives, which sat about 20 feet away. Whether this placement was deliberate or simply careless was irrelevant. The effect would be the same. Smoke in moderate amounts can calm bees, which is why beekeepers use controlled smokers. But thick, acrid smoke from a grill, combined with the increasing noise and movement of party guests wandering into their territory, was a recipe for disaster. "Karen," I said with genuine urgency, "you need to move that grill immediately. The smoke and crowd are agitating my bees." Karen rolled her eyes dramatically, turning to her guests with an exaggerated expression of forbearance. "See what I mean, everyone? Always with the bee excuses. This is exactly why the HOA is concerned." Several guests laughed politely, but others were now eyeing the beehives with growing apprehension. The wind shifted slightly, carrying more smoke toward the hives, and I could see the bees' flight patterns becoming more erratic, a warning sign familiar to any beekeeper. I pulled out my phone and called Adam, who answered immediately. "It's happening," I said tersely. "Karen's got a full party going with a grill sending smoke right at the hives. The bees are getting agitated." Adam promised to come right over, and I ended the call just as Karen approached me, her voice low and threatening. "You're embarrassing yourself," she hissed through her perfect smile. "These people include HOA board members, city officials, and influential residents who could make your life very difficult. Just go back inside and let us enjoy the afternoon. We'll be gone in a few hours." I stood my ground, meeting her gaze. "This is trespassing, Karen. I'm not giving permission for this event on my property, and I'm warning you that your grill is creating a dangerous situation for the bees, which means for your guests, too." She scoffed, turning away dismissively. "No one cares about your precious insects. This party is happening." As she strutted back to her guests, I noticed something concerning. The buzzing from the hives had intensified, becoming audible even over the string quartet. The bees were emerging in greater numbers, their flight patterns shifting from the usual gentle paths to more direct, purposeful movements. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. A waiter carrying a tray of drinks stumbled slightly at the uneven ground where the park met my lawn, splashing champagne onto a flower near one of the hives. The combination of strong scents, smoke, perfume, spilled alcohol, and food, along with the increasing vibrations from guests wandering too close, finally tipped the balance. The first bee struck a woman in a floral dress who had strayed particularly close to the hives, attracted perhaps by the similar patterns on her outfit. Her startled shriek as she swatted at her arm sent a ripple of alarm through the crowd. Then another guest felt the sharp prick of a sting, and another. Within seconds, the elegant garden party transformed into a scene of elegant chaos. Designer heels sinking into soft grass as women ran, champagne glasses abandoned on white tablecloths, the string quartet faltering as the musicians noticed the commotion. "Bees!" someone shouted, triggering an immediate panic. Guests scattered in all directions, some running toward the park, others toward the street, a few even pressing against my house seeking shelter. Karen stood frozen in disbelief as her perfect soiree disintegrated around her. The city council member was swatting frantically at his suit jacket while the HOA board president dove unceremoniously under a catering table. John abandoned the grill entirely, smoke now pouring unattended from its vents, which only agitated the bees further. I tried to restore order, shouting, "Don't swat at them! Move calmly away from the hives!" But my advice went largely unheeded in the panic. Adam arrived in the midst of the chaos, immediately assessing the situation with expert eyes. "They're defending their territory," he confirmed, "not swarming. If people would just move away calmly instead of flailing around." By the time the party guests had retreated to a safe distance, the damage was done. The perfectly arranged tables were overturned, food and drink scattered across the lawn, and Karen's reputation as the neighborhood's premier hostess lay in shambles among the abandoned plates and napkins. Several guests had received stings, though thankfully none appeared to be having serious allergic reactions. As the initial panic subsided, I could see anger replacing fear on many faces. Anger directed not at me or the bees, but at Karen. "You said this location was approved," an elegantly dressed woman accused, dabbing at a sting on her wrist. "You didn't mention anything about beehives." The city council member was on his phone, presumably calling for assistance, while giving Karen a wide berth and a cold stare. Karen stood amid the wreckage of her social aspirations, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. For once she seemed at a loss for words, her mouth opening and closing without sound as she surveyed the disaster around her. When she finally found her voice, it was to attempt one last deflection. "This is his fault," she declared, pointing at me. "He keeps dangerous insects that attack my guests." But her accusation fell on increasingly skeptical ears. One of the HOA board members who had been near enough to overhear my earlier warning stepped forward. "I heard him tell you the grill smoke would agitate the bees. He warned you, Karen, and you ignored him." Others nodded, the narrative shifting before Karen's eyes. As sirens sounded in the distance, someone had called emergency services. I caught a glimpse of Brian at the edge of the crowd, phone raised, documenting everything with barely suppressed glee. The sweet taste of vindication was almost as rich as the honey my bees produced. Karen had orchestrated her own downfall more effectively than I ever could have. The emergency responders arrived quickly, a fire truck, an ambulance, and 2 police cruisers, their lights flashing and creating quite the spectacle for the neighborhood. Paramedics tended to those with bee stings, though fortunately none of the reactions were severe enough to require hospitalization. The fire department addressed the abandoned grill, which had been knocked over in the chaos and posed a potential fire hazard with dry grass nearby. And the police, led by none other than Sergeant Rodriguez from our late-night encounter earlier that week, began taking statements from guests, many of whom were still visibly upset, not about the bees, but about being misled regarding the legitimacy of the event location. Karen attempted to maintain control of the narrative, insisting to anyone who would listen that she had proper authorization for the event and that my dangerous bees were the real problem. But her credibility was rapidly deteriorating. One by one, guests approached Sergeant Rodriguez with variations of the same story. They had been invited to an event they believed was properly sanctioned, only to discover they had been unknowingly trespassing on private property. The city council member was particularly vocal, clearly concerned about potential political fallout from being associated with such an incident. "I would never have attended had I known the situation," he assured the officer loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I respect proper property rights and would expect proper permits for any event I attend." 3 days later, an emergency HOA board meeting was called to address the incident, as it was now being delicately referred to in neighborhood conversations. The community center meeting room was packed beyond capacity, with residents spilling out into the hallway, drawn by the irresistible combination of scandal and governance. Karen arrived with John, both looking uncharacteristically subdued. She had attempted damage control over the weekend, sending apologetic emails to her guests and posting a carefully worded statement in the neighborhood group suggesting there had been misunderstandings on all sides. But the tide of public opinion had decidedly turned against her. Brian's video of the chaos had made the rounds, along with security footage from the night John had damaged my hive, both devastating to Karen's version of events. Dave, the HOA president, called the meeting to order with visible discomfort. "We're here to address the events of Saturday afternoon and determine what, if any, actions the HOA board should take in response." He didn't need to specify which events. Everyone knew exactly why we were there. Lucy sat beside me, legal pad ready, while Adam and Brian flanked us supportively. The solidarity was heartening. These friends had stood by me through Karen's escalating campaign, and now they were here to witness its conclusion. Dave continued, "We'll hear statements from the parties involved, starting with Mrs. Thompson, followed by questions from the board and community members." Karen stood, smoothing her designer skirt with hands that betrayed a slight tremor. Her usual confidence had dimmed, but she made a valiant attempt to salvage her position. "I want to express my regret for how Saturday's community event unfolded," she began, carefully avoiding terms like mistake or apology. "My intention was to bring prestige to our neighborhood by hosting influential guests. I believed I was operating within HOA guidelines regarding community space utilization." She then pivoted to a familiar refrain about the beehives being the root cause of the incident, suggesting that while her approach might have been overzealous, her concerns about safety were valid. It was a masterful performance of contrition without actual admission of wrongdoing until the questions began. Board members who had previously deferred to Karen now pressed her on specific points. Did she receive explicit permission to use private property? Did she misrepresent the location's status to guests? Was she aware of the police report regarding her husband's trespassing? With each question, Karen's responses grew more defensive and contradictory. When presented with Brian's videos and the security footage, she attempted to dismiss them as selective editing, but found little support for this claim. The testimony from guests, particularly the city council member who had submitted a written statement, painted a damning picture of misrepresentation and recklessness. By the time it was my turn to speak, Karen's position had visibly deteriorated. My statement was simple and factual, supported by documentation Lucy had helped me prepare: property deeds confirming my ownership of the yard, permits for the beehives, the police report from John's trespassing incident, and expert testimony from Adam about honeybee behavior. "I have maintained these hives responsibly for 3 years without incident," I concluded. "The only time they've become defensive was when directly threatened, first by Mr. Thompson's tampering and then by the unauthorized party with its smoke and commotion. I warned Mrs. Thompson about the risk, and she chose to ignore that warning." Lucy then presented a timeline of Karen's escalating actions, from her initial demand to use my yard, to the false warning signs, to the social media misinformation campaign, culminating in the party disaster. The board's deliberation was surprisingly brief. Dave returned to the podium looking relieved, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "The board has reached a unanimous decision," he announced. "Mrs. Thompson's actions constitute multiple violations of HOA bylaws, including misrepresentation of HOA authority, unauthorized use of private property, creating a public disturbance, and filing false reports." He paused, seeming to gather courage. "Effective immediately, Mrs. Thompson is removed from her position on the HOA board. Additionally, the HOA will issue a formal apology to the affected homeowner and guests of the event." A murmur of approval ran through the room. Karen sat perfectly still, her face a rigid mask, as Dave continued. "Finally, Mrs. Thompson will be personally responsible for any damages resulting from the incident, including lawn restoration and medical expenses for bee sting treatments." The aftermath of the HOA decision rippled through the neighborhood in waves. Karen and John listed their house for sale within 2 weeks, apparently unable to face the community after such a public humiliation. Several guests from the ill-fated party, led by the city council member, filed small claim suits against Karen personally for misrepresentation and emotional distress. The HOA board under new leadership revised its bylaws to clarify property boundaries and establish clearer protocols for community events. Most satisfying of all, they added specific language protecting environmentally beneficial activities like beekeeping, citing the educational and ecological advantages to the neighborhood. As summer transitioned to fall, I stood in my backyard watching my bees go about their peaceful work, the hives now fully recovered from their earlier disturbance. Adam joined me, bringing jars for the honey harvest we had planned for the afternoon. "Quite a summer, huh?" he remarked, setting down his equipment. "From HOA target to neighborhood hero, those bees of yours are quite the community defenders." I laughed, recalling the journey from Karen's outrageous demand to her ultimate downfall. "I never thought I'd be grateful for someone trying to steal my yard," I admitted. "But in the end, it brought the neighborhood together in unexpected ways." Several residents had expressed interest in learning about beekeeping, and Adam and I were planning a workshop series for the spring. Lucy and Brian arrived for the honey harvest, completing our circle of allies. As we worked together, extracting golden honey from the frames, Lucy raised a jar in a toast. "To the sweetest victory I've ever been part of," she declared with a grin. "Justice has never tasted so good." Brian, filming as always, added, "And to think, all of this started because Karen wanted your backyard for her fancy BBQ. Talk about a sting operation gone wrong." We laughed together, enjoying the sweet rewards of both honey and vindication. Sometimes justice comes in unexpected forms, in this case, delivered by thousands of tiny defenders who were simply protecting their home, just as I had protected mine. Have you ever dealt with an entitled neighbor who thought they could claim what wasn't theirs? Comment below with your own neighborhood drama stories. And don't forget to subscribe for more tales of everyday justice served with a side of sweet, sweet karma.